Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We'll continue where we left off in the book Sarf lil-Mubtadi'in. And we had reached page number 49, where the author says, أوزان الفعل المضارع المبني للمجهول الرباعي. The scales for the present tense verb, which is in the passive voice for the four-letter verbs. In the previous lesson we took mudari' of the three-letter verbs, the present tense of the three-letter verbs. Now we're going to go into the present tense of the four-letter verbs and the passive voice. And alhamdulillah, with the examples that we've taken in the past lesson, the comprehension of making that change from the active voice to the passive voice is quite clear. Maybe we'll take one or two examples using what the author provides here. So, the general principle for making the past tense, which is in the passive voice, become a present tense verb in the passive voice is to make the minor changes as we've come to know. So, we took fa'ala, for example. This is in the active voice, fa'ala. It becomes, in the passive voice, fu'ila. So he did, it was done. He did, fa'ala, fu'ila, it was done. In the present tense you will say, yaf'alu. He is doing. And for the present tense here, we will say, yuf'alu. Yuf'alu. So the qa'idah, for us to change the color here, the principle is, you want to make a present tense verb in the passive voice, in the majhul. What are you to do? You give the harf al-mudari'ah a dhamma, and you give the letter before last a fatha. Now, even though we're dealing with a three-letter verb here, we can apply that same principle in what is to come. So, the scales, alhamdulillah, I believe it's memorized now, the scales for the ruba'i. There are only 4 scales in the present tense. So, if we were to, for example, the verb uf'ila, we've already taken that. I'm going to leave it. Is this a passive voice or is it the active voice? Is it majhul or ma'lum? Uf'ila. Is it passive or active? This is majhul. This is passive voice. So uf'ila, if I want to make this mudari' present tense, still in the majhul, still in the passive voice, where the one doing the action is not being mentioned, I will make a few changes. So I will say here, the first letter gets dhamma. Second last letter takes fatha. So it becomes nam yuf'alu. Yuf'alu. So this verb and this verb, they look exactly the same. If you were to look at, it's 3 letters, fu'ila. Here, 4 letters, uf'ila. But when you look at the mudari', these 2 present tense verbs, they look exactly the same. So how is it that it was 4-letter verb and it looks exactly like the 3-letter verb? We took that already when we discussed the mudari', that this hamza which was originally in the verb was dropped. Remember? It was dropped. The reason it was dropped is لأجل الثقل, due to the heavy pronunciation. So we can say that the essence of that verb in the present tense was not yuf'alu, but it was yu'af'alu. Yu'af'alu. That's how the verb was in its essence. Yu'af'alu. Then what happened? We have this hamza here, which is heavy on the tongue. The hamza is heavy on the tongue to pronounce. When? More so when it unites with another hamza, because the ya, what does the ya indicate in the Arabic language? It indicates him or them. يعني يذهب, يذهبان, يذهبون, يذهبنا. It points to the third person, either as a single male or a group, 2 or more, males and females. For the males, 2 or more, and for the group of males as well. And as for the females, then a group of females, not the dual. Because the dual, it should have a ta, taf'alani. Okay, so what happens here is when you come to the verb in the state where it's a mutakallim, I am the one doing the action, what happens? What letter from the letters of the mudari' point to that? The hamza. So the verb becomes أفعل. أفعل وليس كذلك أفعل. And this is where the heaviness enters into the verb. أفعل. So the Arabs, they do not like the heavy words on the tongue. So they omitted this hamza in order to make it lighter. And the verb became like this. So the verb became, say, let me write it here. أفعل. The verb became أفعل. Now, this hamza that we've omitted, what hamza is it? It is the hamza of أفعل. This hamza here, this is what was dropped. Because it's not possible for you to drop this other hamza. Why is it not possible for you to drop it? Because this hamza indicates a mutakallim. If I was to drop this, it would not be known who the action is being ascribed to. Is it ascribed to him, her, me, us, or we? It's not clear. But when you drop that hamza, there's not an effect. It's a letter that indicates a mudari, but we can suffice ourselves without it. Jayed. So if we're to apply this principle to the rest of the mudari rubai, it would be the same. It would be the same. So, for example, you have the verb فُعِلَ. فُعِلَ. In the mudari, it will become يُفَاعَلُ. يُفَاعَلُ. Why? Because the principle has taught us حرف المضارع, it takes the dhamma, letter before last takes a fatha. And apply that generally to all of that which we've taken. So if we were to use an example now, I think we've got the picture. Let's use an example of a sentence that we're going to convert. You can say, and I give an example of a sentence which is ma'loom, and we're going to convert it. It's in the active voice, it's ma'loom, we want to convert it to the passive voice. Okay, let's use the verb يعلن. I'm going to change it to تعلن. تعلن البنات الدرس, which is translated to mean the girls are announcing the lesson. The girls are announcing the lesson. So I want to convert this. Remember the principles that we took when you're converting. Here you have your fa'il. And pay attention to the maf'ul, the dars. What's going to happen here? So how would we convert that? Make it majhul. Your first step is you drop the fa'il. If you want to make it a passive verb, a verb in the passive voice, I should say, what are you going to do? You're going to drop your fa'il. That's your first step. Then you're going to bring your maf'ul. You're going to bring your maf'ul, the object here. That is maf'ul bih. This is your object. I'm going to allow it to settle in the place of the fa'il, the doer, because I've dropped the doer. And I'm going to make the changes to the verb, the appropriate changes. Now pay attention, because the fa'il was originally a group of females, I have to now make the alteration to suit the maf'ul. So I will bring, first step, I will bring this dars down. I will say darsu. Why am I saying darsu? come to understand this because it's substituting the fa'il. There's a dhamma here, so it's going to take its harakah. It's going to take its place in the sentence. Now I have tu'linu. So how am I going to bring this verb down and make it a verb which is in the passive voice? What am I going to say here? What is the harakat? What am I going to place on this verb? I'm going to say yu'lanu. Now I've already given it away by putting the dots here. Yu'lanu. Why did I choose to give it? Why did I choose to make it a ya when it was originally a ta? Why did I choose to make it a ya? Because you have to pay attention to the object. The object is now masculine, and it's substituted the fa'il. So if the object is the substitute of the fa'il, the na'ib fa'il, if it's masculine, then the verb must also be masculine. It will not be appropriate at this stage to say tu'lanu. Why? Because the dars is masculine. The dars is masculine. So it's yu'lanu darsu. I believe that's واضح? جيد. So let's go through the examples the author mentions here. أفعل, number one, becomes يفعل. أعلن, يعلن, is to announce, to profess. أبغض, يبغض, to hate, or to be hated, in the passive voice. Number two, فُعل يفاعل, دُوفع يدافع, الدفاع والمدافعة, which is to repel, to defend. عُونق يعانق, from the mu'anaqa, which is to hug. Number three, فُعِلَ يُفَعَّلُ, like سُلِّمَ يُسَلَّمُ, سُلِّمَ, to concede to something or to submit something. You say سَلَّمَ مُحَمَّدٌ الْمِفْتَاحَ, Muhammad, he submitted the keys. فُجِّرَ يُفَجَّرُ, which is to explode. فُعِلَ يُفَعْلَلُ, بُرْمِجَ يُبَرْمَجُ, which is to program. وسوس يوسوس, which is to whisper. So now he goes into تصريف الفعل المضارع المبني المجهول الرباعي, the conjugation of الفعل المضارع, the present tense verb, which is مبني للمجهول, which is in this passive voice, which is for four-letter verb. So he gives us a number of verbs. تفضل, do the تصريف for us of أبصر. يبصر, تفضل.
يبصران, يبصرون, تبصر, تبصران, يبصرن, تبصر, تبصران, تبصرون, تبصرين, تبصران, تبصرن, تبصر, يبصر.
جميل. Let's go to the following scale. He says هاتي المضارع المبني للمجهول من الأفعال الآتية وصرفها. Produce, give the present tense verb for the coming verbs, which are in the case of the passive voice, and also conjugate them. So we're going to go to the following scale, and that was for the verb أبصر. فُعِلَ, it becomes يفاعل. Let's try قُوتِلَ.
يقاتل, يقاتلان, يقاتلون, تقاتل, تقاتلان, يقاتلن, تقاتل, تقاتلان, تقاتلون, تقاتلين, تقاتلان, تقاتلن, تقاتل, نقاتل.
جيد. So we'll go to the following scale. فُعِلَ يفعل حسن. تفضل.
يحسن. يحسن, يحسن, يحسنان, يحسنون, تحسن, تحسنان, يحسسن.
So now what happened is the extra sin has been added. يحسن. انظر. So the verb is يحسن. 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 We've added to it Nun Niswa. The effect of Nun Niswa to this verb will be that it makes this become sakin. So then we're going to merge these two noons. Once we merge them, it's pronounced يحسن. يحسن. جميل. Continue from there.
حسن تحسن نعم تحسن تحسنان تحسنون تحسنين تحسنان تحسن أحسن نحسن.
جميل. The following scale was for the verb, which is on the scale of فعلل. فعلل, the مضارع مجهول of فعلل is يفعلل. فعلل يفعلل. So we had reached يفعلل. تفضل in the conjugate. زخرف.
يزخرف يزخرفان يزخرفون تزخرف تزخرفان يزخرفن. تزخرف تزخرفان تزخرفون تزخرفين تزخرفان تزخرفن نزخرف نزخرف.
جميل. طيب, then he goes on from there to say أوزان الفعل المضارع المبني المجهول الخماسي. So now these are the 5 letter verbs. After understanding the 4 letter verbs, and the 5 letter verbs are more or less exactly the same, you're going to just pay attention to a few minor changes which enter upon certain verbs, which are 5 letter verbs, but the general principle still stands. What is the general principle? In converting the present tense active voice to the present tense passive voice, the ma'lum to the majhul. The harf al-mudari'ah, it takes a dhamma, and the letter before last takes a fatha, and everything else remains the same. Everything else remains the same. So if you were to apply this, let's look at the verb. He's given us a verb here, infasala. Infasala. When this into the mudari', you will say yanfasilu. So these are both examples of the active voice. Now, if you were to make it the passive voice, infasala becomes in the madi unfusila. Unfusila. And in the present tense, you would say, apply the principle. So your first letter takes a dhamma, second last letter takes a fatha. Leave everything else the same. If I leave everything else the same, then it becomes is that not the case? Look at the letters, sukoon, haraka, and then dam. Sukoon, haraka, dam. So the only changes are going to be on the first letter, giving it a dhamma, and the letter before last. In unfusila becomes yunfasalu. Jamil. Now this will apply to any verb which starts with a hamza. Any verb that starts with a hamza, then this is what will occur to it. I will just stomp quickly over the verb that starts with a ta. Yeah, we've also discussed why there are certain verbs not mentioned here. And in terms of the mudari' majhul, there are going to be certain verbs that are left out. And some of the ulama mention them, maybe not all of them, but some of them are mentioned. And the reason being is that the Arabs did not use these scales. The Arabs did not use these scales for the mabni majhul, for the passive voice. So they've been omitted. Or essentially, we're supposed to have how many scales for the 5-letter verb? Should be 6. So those scales that have been omitted here, can you identify them? If'alla is gone, and tafa'lala. If'alla and tafa'lala. And this is what the author points to here. He says, تنبيه إنما لم يذكر هنا الوزنان إفعل وتفعلل لأنه لا يؤخذ منهما الفعل المضارع المبني للمجهول غالبا. He says that we did not mention these two scales of إفعل and تفعلل because the present tense passive voice is not commonly extracted from them. ولكن عند الاحتياج يمكن تطبيق القاعدة العامة والله تعالى أعلم. However, when there is a need, he says, however, and if there is a need, then it's possible for us to apply the general principle. So the general principle can apply even to those verbs which are not commonly or frequently used by the Arabs in extracting the passive voice from them. Jameel? Now, the verb that starts with a ta, the verb that starts with the hamza is clear. When the verb starts with a ta, you don't have to make as much changes. You don't have to make as much changes. Let's look at one of these verbs. Tafa'ala, this form. Tafa'ala. In the mudari you will say يتفعل ويتفعل. يتفعل. Now when you make this majhul, tafa'ala becomes in the passive voice تفعل تفعل تعلم تزوج. Now come to the mudari, where we are now. The mudari majhul, present tense passive voice. You will say so it's a haraka. I will give this dhamma. And here, letter before last, it takes a fatha. Is it كذلك? Okay. So let's put the rest of the harakat on there. Now here, if you look at this point, it's exactly like this. So there's no real change that entered here. When the verb starts with a ta, and it's a 5-letter verb, you don't have to make any changes to the second last letter as you've been making throughout these other scales, because the second last letter, it takes a fatha. But on those other scales, it takes a kasra. So you can say, in a general sense, that the present tense verb from the ruba'i, khumasi and sudasi, 4-letter, 5-letter and 6-letter verbs, they commonly take a kasra before the last letter. Except when it's a 5-letter verb, a khumasi that starts with a ta, then the second last letter takes a fatha. So there's less of a change that you have to do here. We didn't really make a change here. Even I don't have to change the color to pink. I can just leave it as a blue because there's no actual change that happened here, as you can see. So there's only one change. يتفعل. طيب. So let's take an example. You will say the sentences تعلم. Well, let me change that to the present tense. يتعلم. زيد الصرف يتعلم زيد الصرف. زيد is learning صرف. How will I make that conversion? How will I make the conversion? For first step, when you want to make something passive voice, what do you do? Remove the fa'il. We're going to get rid of Zayd. Then we're going to take this sarf and put it in the place of Zayd. So the word will then become as-sarfu. Then I come to the verb يتعلم, and I'm going to make it the passive voice. So it becomes, I'll say يتعلم الصرف. The sarf is being studied. One is Zayd is studying the sarf, and one is the sarf is being studied. Jade? Alhamdulillah. I think it's clear. Now, a complication may arise when the person is using a verb that's lazim, like we said, lazim. So let me use another verb. I'll say, for the scale of in fa'ala, if I had the verb in talaqa, انطلق means to depart. انطلق. انطلق أبو محمد. انطلق أبو محمد إلى العمل. Abu Muhammad, he departed to work. Now I want to make this present tense passive voice. I want to say work was departed to without mentioning who did it. So first step, again, remove the fa'il, we get rid of Abu Muhammad. So now we don't have a maf'ul. There's no object. The maf'ul bi is not here because the verb is lazim. It's intransitive as opposed to the previous examples with the transitive verb. So what am I going to do? If I can't find a maf'ul, then the jar wal majroor wal dharf, they will substitute the maf'ul. So I'm going to take this ila al-amal and bring it down. So I will say al-amal. Now what remains? Your conversion of intalaqa in the present tense. So you will say ينطلق. ينطلق will mean ينطلق إلى العمل. What does that mean? ينطلق إلى العمل. If انطلق أبو زيد إلى العمل, Zayd's father departed to work. If you were to remove the fa'il, the doer, then it will become نعم. It was departed to work. Who departed is not mentioned. ينطلق إلى العمل is not mentioned who departed to work. Clear? So this is how you use the passive voice. And we've understood how to make the conversion. Remember that change, which is the first harf al-mudari' will take a dhamma, and the letter before last, they will take a fatha. That's a simple principle to understand. If you got that, then inshallah, the rest of it will be easy. The only other major issue to be alert of is whether the verb is transitive or intransitive, lazim muta'addi, like this example that we've taken here. So let's look at the examples the author mentions. Number one, unfu'ila, yunfa'alu, unfusila, yunfasalu, un'uzila, yun'azalu. And some of them, they may not make sense when you were to actually put them on the scale and conjugate them, I should say, when you put them into conjugation. ولكن it's used for the purpose of practice. So infasala is for something to become detached. In azala is to be aloof and distant. Number two, uftu'ila yufta'ilu umtuhina. Umtuhina from the verb imtahana, which is to test. Or to excuse oneself, or to make an excuse for someone. اعتذرت له. Number three, تفعل يتفعل, تصدق, obviously to give صدقة, يتصدق in the present tense, تدبر, and to reflect from تدبر, يتدبر. Then you have on the fourth scale تفوعل, يتفاعل. And that change which has happened on the alif to become a waw, we've already discussed in the past. If the alif is preceded by a dhamma, then it will be converted to a waw. It doesn't need much of an explanation here, as we took it in the past tense, fu'ila. So he says here, تفوعل يتفاعل, تروجع, يتراجع, from a taraja, to retract, to recant. تصولح يتصالح, and if we're in agreement to occur, and we've already read this notice that he's given us here as to why he did not mention those two other skills. So he says here تصريف الفعل المضارع المبني للمجهول الخماسي, the conjugation of the فعل المضارع, the present tense of verb, which is مبني للمجهول, which is in the passive voice, and it's a 5-letter verb. So we have the verbs such as ينفعل ينفعل. He's given us some verbs here. He says هات المضارع مبني للمجهول من الأفعال الآتية. The مصرفات give us the مبني المجهول of these coming verbs, and then conjugate. So if you have انكشف becomes ينكشف. تفضل.
ينكشفان, ينكشفون, تنكشف تنكشفان ينكشفن تنكشف تنكشفان تنكشفون تنكشفين تنكشفان تنكشفن انكشفوا ينكشفوا.
نعم. Number 2 uses the following scale, which is افتعل يفتعل. افتعل يفتعل. Again says هات المضارع المبني للمجهول من الأفعال الآتية مع تصريفها. So you have اختبر يختبر. تفضل.
يختبر يختبران يختبرون يختبر تختبران يختبرن تختبر تختبران تختبرون تختبرين تختبران تختبرين
نعم.
تختبران تختبرن اختبر نختبر.
ما شاء الله. وأنت تختبر؟ هل أنت تختبر الآن؟ نعم. اختبر is to be tested. طيب, the following scale is تفعل يتفعل. Like تكلم becomes يتكلم. تفضل.
يتكلم يتكلمان يتكلمون تكلمان يتكلمن.
You dropped the ta in the beginning. By the way, that is permissible. It's the Arabic language permits it. فأنذرتكم نارا تلظى. تلظى is actually تتلظى. But the Arabic language permits for you to drop the ta in the beginning to lighten it. تفضل.
يتكلم يتكلمان يتكلمون تتكلم تتكلمان يتكلمن تتكلم تتكلمان تتكلمون تتكلمين تتكلمان تتكلمن أتكلم نتكلم.
Then you have this following scale, which is تفعل يتفاعل. تفعل يتفاعل, like the verb تسامح يتسامح. تفضل.
يتسامح يتسامحان يتسامحون يتسامح تتسامحان يتسامحن تتسامح تتسامحان تتسامحون تتسامحين تتسامحان تتسامحن تتسامح يتسامح.
تتسامحنا. طيب, so then you completed it. We'll go into the following scale, which is for the 6-letter verbs. The author says وزن الفعل المضارع المبني للمجهول السداسي, the scale of the present tense verb, which is in the passive voice, that is 6 letters. استفعل يستفعل. استفعل يستفعل. So once you've understood that principle, then there's not much really left. It's exactly like in fa'ala or ifta'ala. So if you have the verb which is on the scale of استفعل, I'll write it out, استفعل. Then the present tense would be of استفعل. Apply the principle, right? So the first letter takes a dhamma, and the letter before last takes a fatha, and everything else remains the same. So you say yustaf'alu. Everything else remains the same as the present tense. So yustaf'alu. So we can say, for example, istaghfara means istaghfara is to seek forgiveness. So how would you say? Okay, give me a sentence with istaghfara, or in the present tense. It can be any person. In fact, let's make it a bit tricky and say the 2 women were seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 2 women are seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 2 women, you say Al-mar'atan, but just bring in the beginning. Al-mar'atani, the 2 women, tastaghfarani, and then complete the sentence by saying تستغفراني الله أو تستغفراني ربهما. The 2 women are seeking forgiveness from the Lord. So المرأتان, the 2 women, تستغفراني المرأتان تستغفران الله. The two women are seeking forgiveness from Allah. Now I want to make this majhul, in the passive voice. I want to say forgiveness is being sought from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what am I going to do here? So where's the fa'il here in this sentence? This is actually quite tricky because we've been dealing with the fa'il that is ism zahir, a proper noun. We haven't been dealing with the fa'il that is a pronoun. So here, so first of all, I'm going to get rid of the two women because the two women, they're not the fa'il here, because the fa'il doesn't come before the fi'l. We do the i'rab that this is the mubtada. But within the verb tastaghfirani, what am I going to remove from there? I'm going to remove this alif. This is the fa'il here, alif al-ithnain. This is what's pointing me to the do of the action. So once I get rid of this, I'm going to get rid of the noon along with it, because it's for the dual. It points to the dual in case. It's thubut. This is noon al-raf in this case. This alif points to the dual and the noon points to the sign that it is in a state of raf. So this is going to come down, and lafz al-jalala before that, Allah. I will write Allah. What's the vowel that it's going to take? It's going to be marfu now because the fa'il is marfu. This alif right now is in the case of raf. This is in the genitive case. So Allahu, lafz al-jalala, will take a dhamma because it's substituting the alif. Now, what am I going to do with the verb? I'm going to now make the changes and say the verb will become yustaghfaru. Yustaghfaru. Yustaghfarullah. Yustaghfarullah. Now a person will ask, how did it become yustaghfarullahu? What happened to the ta? What happened? Because the ta, this, in addition to the alif, all of this were pointing to two females. It's all connected to the doer. It's all a sign as to who's speaking and whether they're male or female. All of this together. So I want to eliminate from the verb anything that points to that. Now because lafz al-jalala, Allah, this lafz al-jalala is in the place of the fa'il. So I make the verb suitable for it. So I leave it as yustaghfaru. And this kind of a change, it doesn't matter who the fa'il is. It could have been a group of men, it could have been a group of women, it could have been a single woman, it could have been a single male. The change, if it was a single male, then it would have been the same. Yustaghfirullah. So if the sentence was yastaghfiru Zaydun Allah, Zayd is seeking forgiveness from Allah, then it would have became the same. Yustaghfirullah. If it was tastaghfiru an-nisa'u Allah, the women ask forgiveness from Allah, it would still become yustaghfarullahu. It would always be the same. So let's look at the examples he's given here. He says, Ustuf'ila yustaf'alu, ustuqbiha yustaqbahu, ustukhrija yustakhraju. Ustuqbiha is to deem something vile, to view or hold something as horrendous, something هذا mustaqbah. And ustukhrija is for something to be extracted from istakhraja, yastakhriju, to extract, to remove something. So he says here tasrif was conjugation. I believe he's probably given us verbs down here. طيب. You have the verb ustusghira. How would you conjugate that? Ustusghira. Yustasgharu.
Yustasgharani.
Tustasghar.
And tustasgharani. Yustasgharna.
Yustasgharna. تستصغر
يعني تستصغران يعني تستصغرون يعني تستصغرين تستصغران يعني تستصغرن يعني استصغر مستصغر.
Use استعمل becomes يستعمل. تفضل.
يستعملان يستعملون استعملوا تستعملان استعملنا تستعملوا استعملان استعملون تستعملين تستعملان
تستعملنا. نستعمل جميل جدا. Alhamdulillah, with this we have completed this bab, and inshallah we'll stop here in the coming halaqah. We'll take it from the ism maf'ul.